Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about sex and the really strange relationship that I think most trans people have with sex, and especially the way that changes over the course of transition. Because if you aren't familiar, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is going to adjust your sex drive or your sexuality in some way, whether it be in how you feel the intensity of it or in the types of people you might even find yourself into. It is a very powerful process, and over time, my sex life changed a lot, and my sex drive and sexuality changed a lot too. And that's not to say that you become anything different, but for instance, going on testosterone blockers will make you a lot less horny than you were before. So if you want to learn more about this, stick around. I'm going to try to have as in-depth of my anecdotal experience as possible. Please do not be one of those people that quotes one sentence of this video out of context at me and says, "Why are you telling people this?" when I want you to know that I am speaking of my personal experience with my sexuality and anecdotally what I know of the trans people in my life that I speak about this stuff with, because I know several and I think it's important to talk about. So without further ado, this is my journey with my sexuality over the course of my transition. So I was not a very sexual person my whole life, really. My friends would start talking about, like getting attracted or even masturbating when I was younger, and I was like, ew, what's that? And I was kind of a late bloomer with that and didn't really even masturbate for the first time until I was like 14. And I remember it was an accident. I didn't know what it was. Nobody talked to me about it. I didn't learn about sex the right way, I guess. So I didn't even know that people did that. And I ended up being really confused and ashamed of it, and I didn't talk about it, and I tried to hide it. But so because of it, I wasn't really into pornography. I wasn't really into looking at porn. I was mostly into just looking at at most lewds or pictures of people in bathing suits. And I remember even from the youngest age, I was not able to be attracted to women the same way I was attracted to men, but I was so deep in denial about that. I just didn't acknowledge that, and I just assumed I was attracted to nobody. When I was 15, I entered my first relationship with a girl who I liked a lot, and we got along really well, and it was a fun experience, but ultimately, it wasn't like a sexual experience, I think a lot of high school relationships are like that. And I dated multiple girls, all of which it really didn't become very sexual. Even my last girlfriend, who I love very much, I tried to get sexual with because I was trying to prove to myself that I could, because eventually when you get to a certain age, you are taught that in order to be worth something, you have to have sex. And I know that sounds bad, and I don't agree with it now, and I wish I could go back in time and tell myself, no, it's okay. It's okay to not want sex right now, But I didn't have that, and I was oversexed and understimulated, and I just tried really hard to find something. And I remember the first time I saw her breasts was the next day I broke up with her. And I felt so bad because she was like, "Do you like them?" And I was looking at them, and I really wanted to say yes, but I couldn't. I couldn't say yes. And well, I did say yes, but I paused and I hugged her, and then I said yes. And they were beautiful, but I wasn't ready, And I was young, and that's one thing is I do think that a lot of people feel like they're pressured into having sex in order to be an adult. And I think everyone needs to accept that not everyone is the same. Not everybody is ready for the same things at the same time as other people, and just try to be in touch with yourself before you let other people tell you what to do. But I remember it was Christmas, and I was seeing her, and she could tell something was wrong, and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Nothing's wrong." I tried really hard, but eventually I pulled her aside, and I was like, "Look, I'm going to be honest, I'm gay, and I don't know how to tell you." And she was so understanding about it, and we did stay friends, and I'm so glad for that. But I felt so much shame. I was so ashamed of myself. I was so sad, especially to do that to somebody on Christmas. But I couldn't live the lie anymore. Once I accepted that part of my sexuality, it was too hard to be. I'm not actually a very good actress. I'm not good at pretending to be something that I'm not. once I admitted to myself that I wasn't attracted to her, I couldn't try to convince her of that, you know? And people are intuitive, and they can tell. And that's one thing a lot of people say with transness. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that's why I want to make videos like this, so people realize that it's never too late to start and just live your life so that you can get this weight lifted off of you. Because eventually the lie is too hard to live. And I don't want to pressure anybody to doing anything they're not ready to do. But that's what it was for me. That was what it was like for me. So over the course of that time, I thought that I had found myself, but I didn't really. And it took me a while to find who I really was. But I've done more videos on that specific process, but I really wanted, at the time when I identified as a gay man, I wanted to be able to be with a man so I could confirm it to myself, because I had never been with one. And I think that was another way that I was trying to assure myself that I had figured out who I was. But it's really hard when you're young and gay. Even if you're in a open-minded area like I was, there aren't a lot of other gay kids, and your options are really limited. And I was very desperate to find somebody who I felt understood me. And so because of it, I didn't even have any good sexual experiences. It was mostly a lot of emotional relationships that had very little sexual reciprocal happiness in them, you know? And it was because I wasn't ready for it, but I thought I was, you know, and I was searching for it in the wrong places. And eventually, when I got older and I went away to college, I had boyfriends, but it wasn't it was never a sexually mutually beneficial relationship. I wasn't able to be like that with someone. And looking back, it was, I think, because of my dysphoria with my genitals. It's important to recognize that sexuality and who you're attracted to does not necessarily mean that you will have a good sexual experience with them. And I think that a lot of trans people can relate to my story. There's a siren. I think that a lot of trans people can relate to my story, in which I didn't really have a mutually beneficial sexual relationship for most of my life. In fact, I didn't until up like a year or two ago. And I'm not even kidding that I thought that was something that I was never going to be able to have. I thought that because of my transition, because of the way I always had been, because of my sexual reassignment surgery and the trauma that the area went through, because of that, I thought that I was never going to have that normal kind of sexual experience. And that's why I want to make this video, to let people know that it will happen. It's just a matter of when. It's not a matter of if. And maybe that's not fair for me to say. Maybe for some people it never will happen. Asexuality is real. I thought I was asexual at one point in my life, and now I am realizing that I was coming into my sexuality later in my life, and a lot of people, I think, can relate to that. Especially the trans people I know have similar experiences. Especially, if you have gender-affirming surgery on the genital area, it can be really hard to retrain that area to not feel like a trauma center. Because even though it was a gender-affirming surgery and I loved it and I'm so happy with the results, it did not feel very sexy, you know? Because it is a healing process. You can't just get a vagina and start pounding away. It was a long process for me. And that's why one thing I would say too is I don't want any trans person to think that they need this surgery to be trans, because not everyone can get it. It can be really hard to access. It takes a long time. You have to be on a wait list forever. And the recovery process is horrible for some, and for others it's like a breeze. I know trans women who recovered so fast, and not everyone's going to be the same. Not everyone's going to be the same as me. But just do not think that you need this, because society tells trans women all the ways they don't think they're real women. And even if you have a vagina, people are going to compare it to Beyond Meat. You know what I mean? Even if you do everything right, people are going to take what they can down about you, because people do that. They do that to everyone, not just to trans people, but it's easy to do it to trans people. So don't let them help you do it to you, if that makes sense. Eventually, I was in college when I finally came to terms with the fact that I wanted to transition, and I had been able to be prescribed spironolactone a few months prior, and that is a testosterone blocker. And what not a lot of people know is that you can be prescribed just the testosterone blocker without the estrogen, just so you can delay your puberty and see how you feel about it. It's not recommended to be on it long term. Like my doctor told me, don't take just this for like over a year. And I get that now, especially looking back, because I had so little hormones in my body because of that. It was not good for the biochemistry of my body. But just know that, especially for male to female transition, puberty is hard to reverse. And so that's one of the reasons I feel really passionate about letting children have access to transition if they want to, especially puberty blockers, not necessarily estrogen, because I do understand why people don't want like something irreversible to happen to a kid before they can quote unquote consent. But I don't think it's fair, and I think that children should be able to have access to transition, especially spironolactone, because without it, I don't know if I would be able to feel the gender euphoria that I do today, because I think everyone deserves that. But anyway, while I was on spironolactone, that was when my sexuality really began to change, because once I was like 16 and up, like I did start to masturbate pretty regularly, and it was because my body was maturing, but it was also really hard because I never was able to have a reciprocal sexual encounter. It was only masturbation. And when I started spironolactone, it was actually when I stopped doing that. I basically stopped masturbating entirely, and that was at that point in my life I thought I was asexual, but especially because I was on testosterone blockers and no other hormones, that was why I was feeling asexual. And that's not how everyone is, obviously, but that's how I was. And eventually I did start estrogen, and estrogen, when you first start it, they give you a really high dose. It's so the body can get used to the levels quickly, because it's an adjustment, and hormones are something that you cannot speed the process up. So there is a science behind it, and I trusted my doctor. And that's why, if you are going to self-medicate with HRT, please do it right. Please at least consult a doctor, do something. Anyway, do not damage your health. Be safe. Do not damage yourself. We do not need more dead trans people. We don't. We have enough dead trans people. I hate to say it, but we do. Anyway, when I started estrogen, that was when my sexuality began to come back, but I do feel it was in a different way. Especially people talk about the difference in orgasm. Even while I had a penis, my orgasms were different once I started HRT, and it is very hard to quantify, and my orgasms over the course of my whole transition have continued to get different. So I'm not going to say it's one thing, but just know that you will change your relationship with your sexuality. You might, at least. I mean, I'm sure there are some trans people who do not experience that, and to them I envy. But there's a lot of stuff that I had to relearn. So hopefully this video can help with that. But I did start to become very horny when I started taking estrogen. And I also, it was at the same time I was transitioning, so I was really desperate for validation. A lot of trans people can relate to this. You think that if somebody doesn't love you, that means that nobody will love you, or that you aren't worth love. And I really wish that people did not do that, but I did it, and I'm still unlearning that, and I just hope that you don't self-destruct because of that, because a lot of people do. They do self-destructive things, and the early stages of transition I did a video about are very difficult, because you will be experiencing so much change at once, and you can't have your life and social circle and physicality and sexuality and physical health all change at the same time without possibly self-destructing, because that's what I did, and I don't want other people to do that. So people wonder why I disappeared from YouTube. It was because I kind of started to self-destruct, and it wasn't horrible. I'm back. I came out of it totally good, and I'm really happy now, and I want to inspire people, but I also want to be honest. So just make sure that when you're early on in your transition, specifically on hormone replacement therapy, and I'm just speaking of the experience of a trans woman. Trans men have a whole different experience with HRT, which you should consult a trans man, not me. But just know that if you take testosterone for any reason, steroids, whatever, you are going to experience a sexual restructuring or awakening of some sort, regardless of how powerful, So just remember, you're gonna experience something. A lot of people also throughout their transition realize they thought they were attracted to one gender and they realized they were attracted to a lot of genders. And I think that trans people appreciate and love gender more than anybody because they've seen both sides, or at least they've seen a lot of sides. Because I've seen both sides, and I've seen all sorts of sides, because there's being treated as a man, there's being treated as third gender, queer. Like, being treated as queer is kind of being treated as a third gender, because people don't treat you like a man and they don't treat you like a woman. They tend to treat you like a thing. And, well, certain people do. And I do get treated as a woman. Regardless of all the people who comment on my videos that you're a man, like, whatever I don't care, guys. I do get treated like a woman in my life. I get ma'amed, and I see the difference. I mean, one thing is, when I was younger, people treated me like I was a genius just because I was fairly articulate. And young boys, that happens. You know, if you're smart and articulate, you get treated as a genius if you're a boy, but if you're a girl, you don't. And when I transitioned, my intelligence got taken so less seriously. It was kind of interesting. And it made me doubt my own intelligence. And I think I'm an intelligent person, and I don't want society to change the way I see myself. Anyway, once I was about a year on estrogen, I did start to have somewhat reciprocal sexual encounters. Somewhat. It did always involve, like, mutual masturbation, you know, because I really didn't like it when people would touch me down there, and a lot of trans people can relate, because I didn't like me down there. And that was really hard for the partners that I did have, because it kind of, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, you know? A lot of trans people, they want a reciprocal sexual relationship, but they don't want the physical sex because they hate their genitals. And some of them don't. I know a lot of trans women who love their penises. I envy that, you know? That's penis envy. Alright, Freud? I wish that I enjoyed my penis when I had it, but I didn't. And that is why I'm really happy that I was able to do the hard thing and overcome it and come out the other side. And if you want to see more about that, I've done a lot of videos on my SRS, but it was an ongoing process, and I'm 7 years into transition, and I'm learning new things about myself and transition every day. It was when I was over 2 years on estrogen when I got, I had been on testosterone blockers for longer, and I had been diagnosed with gender dysphoria for longer than that, but I was on the wait list, and once I was a little over 2 years on estrogen was when I got my sexual reassignment surgery, and that was when my sexuality really began to change, because what not a lot of trans people think about it, well, actually that's not fair, a lot of them do, but there is a difference between being on HRT with spironolactone as a testosterone blocker and being on just HRT with estrogen. Because the spironolactone wasn't agreeing with me. It was genuinely sapping my energy. I felt a lot of fatigue, and I was also amidst an eating disorder, which was part of the problem, you know. And then because of it, my body wasn't able to absorb the hormones. I've done a whole video on that. But when you have testes, they are producing testosterone. They are, unless you take Spiro, and that's why a lot of trans women that don't get sexual reassignment surgery do get something called an orchiectomy, where you have your testes removed and not your penis, because that is much less invasive. The process for recovery is much simpler, and it can be easier to get that in surgery as well. And once you do that, you are no longer having to fight the testosterone in your body, which for some trans people is a big plus. Also, it becomes easier to tuck. It becomes easier to essentially live a gender affirming life, if that makes sense, which you do not need to do, but a lot of trans people want that. And I specifically did not want to have to be on Spiro anymore. So when I was going into surgery, I actually had to stop taking HRT, because it's something about like the levels when I was going to be under, because and I've done multiple videos, but the weeks right after my surgery were really brutal and really tough, and I don't even remember them. I'm the type of person, I remember everything in my life. I remember everything in my life, but I do not remember those weeks. So if you're getting the surgery and you are like me, I am sensitive to pain, make sure you have a support system. Otherwise, I would wait. Princess Jules did a video on how she did her sexual reassignment surgery. She went overseas. I don't remember if she had somebody there with her, but she said that the experience was very traumatic, and I believe her. A lot of trans women do have a traumatic experience with SRS. Not all of them. not the lucky ones, you know, and not the rich ones. Like, it does matter what you pay if that's just how it was. When I had my SRS, I did not go into a like nurse ward. Like, I was being taken care of by people who didn't even know what SRS was, and people who weren't like, apparently at one point my sheets hadn't been getting changed, and I didn't know this because I wasn't conscious, but I had sweated the sheets so much that they were cold and I was freezing. And I wasn't in a facility that had the standards or quality control to stop that from happening. And if I hadn't had my mom and partner there, it might have been really ugly for me. And so, like I said, be very careful to have a support system when you do this, if you do it. And if you don't do it, please look into getting an orchiectomy, because the trans women I know who have one are very happy with it. And remember, for the 12 billionth time, you do not need this surgery to be a woman. You don't. Even if you get it, people are going to tell you you're a man, because people suck. I started recovering from surgery. It became better quickly, but it was still tough. But I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to orgasm again. I was scared. You know, I had to relearn how to pee, so obviously I would have to relearn how to have an orgasm. But I had my first orgasm like 2 months after the surgery. I'm not kidding. And I was shocked. I could not believe that it happened so soon for me. And I did a video, but I was one of the people that developed complications from SRS, and I still was able to have orgasms. So I would like people to understand that you will, at least I did not lose that, and you don't have to be afraid of that specifically. I did develop a problem with my sexuality though, post SRS, because part of it was the problem that I was not metabolizing my hormones properly because of my eating disorder. But I also was having to dilate constantly, and it was giving me the wrong associations with feeling in that area. It was essentially reminding me of my trauma every time I was touched down there, and it became really unpleasant for me to be touched by anybody. And that was what really affected my sexuality. And there was a good portion of my life where I was just having sex for validation. I was not even receiving anything because I wouldn't let people give me anything. And I was just performing. I was just, doing oral. I was just doing something for someone, but I was never receiving anything. And I think part of it was my trauma down there, and I wasn't dealing with it. I wasn't ready to deal with it, and I was still healing. I was doing physical therapy, I was dilating, and that was painful and unpleasant. And it affected my sexuality to the point that I started to believe I was asexual. But I, again, had this idea impressed in me that if I was not having sex, I would not be sexy. I was not attractive. I was not an adult. And I just want to remind trans people that it's not going to make you feel better if you just have sex. It won't. I only, within the last 2 years in my life, was able to have good sex for the first time. And I had never had that. I had never had sex that I had enjoyed until like 2 years ago. And I'm 25. And I had been having sex since I was 18. So I think that goes to show how much of my sex life was unpleasant. It wasn't reciprocal. It wasn't mutually beneficial. It wasn't anything for me other than I felt validated by someone being attracted enough to me to have it. Because I felt if I wasn't having sex, that meant I wasn't attractive. And that is a type of dysphoria. That's a type of dysmorphia that everyone experiences at some point. So check yourself. Remind yourself that isn't healthy either. That isn't something you should do. And you aren't going to feel better if you have sex, because I didn't, at least. And that is ultimately how I put myself in an unsafe situation, to the point where I was raped. I was sexually assaulted because I was willing to just hang out with anybody that was attracted to me because I thought that would make me feel better, and it did not. It didn't help at all. I did a video describing in more detail my recent experience with sexuality and sexual awakening, but a lot of that came when I was able to overcome the complications I had with SRS. Like I said, I was still able to have orgasms, but I just didn't, and I never masturbated. I honestly still don't masturbate, and I'm working on trying to do that for myself more, just so I do, but I do every day feel myself and my sexuality slowly getting into a better place. And like I said, I'm 7 years in. I'm going to probably still experience changes over the course of these next 3 years, for instance. And expect that for yourself too, at least, because I now am able to not only have mutually beneficial sex, I'm able to have penetrative sex, vaginal penetrative sex. I had never been able to have that. And I cannot express the difference I felt having sex that made me feel good versus the types of sex I had had before. So the one thing I will say is I hope that every trans person who would watch this video or cares to would want to respect themselves enough to only have the types of sex that make them feel really good and not perform or do all this sex that you think will validate you, because it might not, and you might put yourself in an unsafe situation like I did. So just remember that if you aren't having a good sex life and you feel really bad about your sex life and you feel weird about it like I did, just know that you might not always feel that way. You are going to change every day. Every day you're gonna wake up and feel a little more sure of your identity. At least I did. And maybe you won't overnight. I did a video about how it tends to get worse before it gets better with transition. And for a lot of people it gets worse. And remember that 80% of trans people contemplate suicide, and 40% of trans people attempt. So please take your dysphoria, your self-destructive tendencies, take them all seriously. Protect yourself. The world does not need more trans people that kill themselves. They need more trans people, I think. So if you're feeling down and you're not sure that you can ever have a normal sex life because you're trans, just remember that is society's idea of you being impressed on you. That's not reality, because I'm not gonna lie, I am still dealing with internalized transphobia. There was a time in my life where I contemplated deleting everything I had posted on social media because I felt shame. And looking back, that is so crazy to me, because there is no reason for me to be ashamed of the person I was or am. But I was, and I believe it was because society did make me feel like I should be ashamed of my past. And I hope that a trans person that is listening to this, that is ashamed of their past, could maybe restructure that and be proud of who they were instead, because we are only here today because of the people that we were, even if we were shitty people. Because a lot of trans people, before they transition, have a lot of hate or inner transphobia or issues in their heart that make them lash out at people. I know I did. I was a very angry person before I transitioned. So I hope that every trans person who sees this knows that it's only up from here. And I want to leave you with the idea that transition is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's a matter of when you realize that you can't live the lie anymore. So I want to encourage you to not live that lie if you think you still are. And I think even once I started transitioning, it took me a while before I acknowledged to myself that it's okay to be trans, And I hope that you can acknowledge that. Take care of yourself. I really hope that if you enjoyed this video, you'll like, I hope you'll comment, and I really hope you'll hit the notification bell, because I think that I have a lot of insight on the trans experience, and I think that if more trans people were able to see that it's okay and you can come out the light at the end of the tunnel, that less of them would kill themselves. So please try to make a difference.